Done.
Fantastic. So how it's going to work this afternoon is Sinead and I have our own questions for the panel, and then we would love you to give us your questions too. So please make sure you put those in the Q&A, not in the chat, and that way we can keep them in order and make sure we get to your question. Okay, so let's start. Firstly, for our panelists, can I get each of you to introduce yourself, tell us about your background, you know, what you were like growing up and how you got into the venture capital space. Lauren, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you, Sinead and Rosie, for putting on such a wonderful event. And it's amazing that we can all do this online, and despite being in various cities right now. So my name is Lauren Fong. I work at Icehouse Ventures, and my role is to manage Archangels, which is both a fund and network that exclusively invests in women in New Zealand. A bit about me: I grew up actually wanting to be a lawyer, and then realized that that wasn't for me, and I just was really passionate about startups and anything to do with business. So I did a business degree in Wellington. I went on to start my own business out of Portland, Oregon, and then after that I landed a job at Icehouse Ventures. Also outside of work, a huge part of my identity, I suppose, is music. So I'm also an electronic producer and DJ. And a lot of that, I see a lot of overlaps in these two industries, I guess, being quite male dominated. So I like to bring that same energy and creativity to my role. And yeah, and it's great to be here. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Heather, can we hear from you next, please?
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here today amongst these awesome women in VC. And yes, thanks for hosting, Rosie and Sinead. As Rosie mentioned, my name is Heather Gaddoniex. I'm a recent transplant to New Zealand. My husband and I actually ventured out on a family holiday to see his parents in, was it March of 2020? And we never left. So after a year of working for my San Francisco employer remotely, that was rough on the time zones, but we made the decision to permanently relocate. Happy to be here, very stoked to be permanently moving to New Zealand. But before moving here, I spent nearly 20 years working in go-to-market roles for high-growth technology companies headquartered in Silicon Valley and in Europe. I started in the product marketing space, transitioned into demand gen and then sales, and then moved on to executive leadership functions, leading mainly communication, marketing, and go-to-market teams. I also had a brief stint working at a 100-year-old multinational organization, which was quite different than working in high-growth startups. But I was working in product management and product marketing there. And I learned so much about organizational dynamics and leadership and things like that. Like Laura, I also was a founder. So earlier in my career, I started a company focused on supply chain sustainability and product analytics. It's still growing strong today, run by my co-founder. She's in Portland, Oregon now. And nowadays, I'm a CMO and operating partner at GD1. So I help our portfolio companies supercharge their growth, implement global best practices for their go-to-market strategies. I'm on a few boards, both as an advisor and observer, and I still have a few US and European clients that I work with to help with go-to-market strategy and leadership coaching. I just really want to stay connected to that international market and keep my global networks fresh.
Fantastic. And Sam?
Awesome. Can you all hear me? Well, kia ora everyone, I'm Sam Wong. I'm a partner at Blackbird Ventures. I'm normally based in Auckland. Right this second, I'm back in Sydney, and kind of going to pull on some of the threads that Lauren and Heather touched on as well. So I have no connection with New Zealand originally. I don't have Kiwi family. My partner isn't Kiwi, he's English. We just did a South Island road trip in 2018 and thought that New Zealand could be a pretty amazing place to build a life together. And at that time we didn't have a kid, but we had made the decision that holiday to start trying. And then by 2019, I realized that there was a really amazing opportunity to pull together the ecosystem and bring our sort of founder-focused, community-driven, I guess, philosophy of venture to New Zealand and connect it also with our Australian portfolio. So I moved over at the beginning of 2019, a month before the pandemic, which actually, for the most part, has been a really great decision. In terms of how I grew up, so I grew up between Perth and Sydney. My parents are first generation migrants to Australia. I had a bit of an unconventional childhood. I grew up wanting to be a journalist, but became a lawyer. I didn't want to be a lawyer though, so I left law and joined a startup first in email marketing and then product management. And then I started the European arm of the business in France and lived there for a few years, where I met my partner, who was the only other non-French person in the town that we were living in. And then I founded my own company that went through the StartMate Accelerator. And that's where I met the Blackbird partners, and in particular, Nikki Shavak, who co-founded Blackbird, because he at that time was still running StartMate by himself. And I was sort of between startups, and they were hiring their first person for the fund, and I really wanted Blackbird to fund my next company. And so I thought if I took the role and did a half decent job, that would be a great way of getting my next company funded. And I basically just haven't looked back, and that was 7 years ago. And just love growing our firm and growing our brand, and also being part of a really amazing growing ecosystem. It is just exponentially exploding, and such an exciting time. I am not cool like Lauren. I have no hobbies. I'm just a mom, and try to slow down and be really present for her when I'm not otherwise going a million miles an hour in this job. But yeah, looking forward to the chat with everyone today. And thanks so much, Sinead and Rosie, for putting it on.
Fantastic. Okay, let's start. Maybe Lauren, you want to take this? Do you want to describe for us what a VC actually is, in case anyone's not overly familiar, and just what your specific role is within that?
Sure. So VC, otherwise known as venture capital, it's an investment group or firm or a fund that will invest into early stage companies. So when I say early stage, a company could be raising anywhere between its pre-seed round, or even before that, family and friends, all the way through to sort of pre-series A and beyond. Venture capital, the sweet spot is sort of pre-seed, seed, pre-series A, and kind of can go beyond that. So a venture capital firm will raise funds, so they'll take investors' money and they'll put it into a pool of capital, which will then get invested into multiple companies. And so my role at ISAS Ventures, we're a venture capital company, and we manage multiple funds with different mandates. So to give you an example, the fund that I helped raise, invest and manage is called the Archangels Fund, and it only invests in women. So it's a $2.8 million fund. So last year I went out and helped raise $2.8 million from private investors. And then this year have spent the entire year deploying that capital into 30 women-led companies. And our investors in this fund, they expect to see, a return over, say, 5-10 years or longer than that, and sort of watch the performance of this fund over time. So that's my role in the context of venture capital. And then there's fundraising, there's investing, and then a lot of deal flow screening. So a lot of the time I'm listening and sort of receiving pitches from founders who are, showing me or telling me their startup idea. And as a firm, we, decide to either back them and invest in them, or, try and support them in some other shape or form.
Cool. Just making sure I'm not on mute. Thank you. That was really helpful. So next question we had was, how do investors add value to founders? And what are some ways in which you've helped or advised founders? And maybe a bit of info on some examples of what that might look like. So I don't know who wants to take that one?
I can start and then hand it over if that's helpful. So I think from an operating partner standpoint, this is actually a really, really great question, really astute question. So for example, a lot of my role, a very large portion of my role at GD1 is just helping our portfolio companies with go-to-market strategy, digging in with them on comms, digging in with them on growth plans. And I think that's the type of value that as founders, you should look for when seeking out funding. Like, no longer in the VC world is it enough to just write a check or give cash. There has to be value add there, and there has to be value add beyond just making a connection here and there, but really helping with how to establish the best operating principles you can for your organization, how to look at growth and scale, how to look at talent acquisition. Like, this is a huge component of value add for so many organizations. And really supporting not just the founder, like at least this is one of my strong philosophies, not supporting just the founder on the journey. That's super important, but also supporting the entire operating team that surrounds that founder, because the founder is only as good as the team around them. They're only as good at executing and establishing growth as the operating team that they bring on. So really ensuring that the fund that you're looking at and the team that you're looking at within that fund has capabilities, expertise, resources, and almost a little bit of that been there, done that mandate within their team is really, really critical.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely seen startups that have just scaled massively the moment they've kind of taken on someone, not just financially, but that can kind of give that capability. So that's great. Thank you. Rosie?
Yeah,
I would just agree with everything Heather has said, particularly, the idea that money is sufficient, these days, and also that sometimes the best way to help a founder of a fast scaling company is not to just give more feedback for that founder, but to then distill inside their organization, because they're already probably quite bottlenecked, and by lifting up the operators around them, that is huge. I think what we've started to think about as a firm is we're at almost 100 portfolio companies. We'll add another 30 in the next year and a half. How do we scalably do that? And so in the last year, we've started programs like the Founder Academy, which sort of runs over 6 to 7 weeks. We get operators and founders from all over the world to kind of help over sort of cohort-based learnings around go-to-market or leadership and people and product management and all of these things. And they're not really courses, it's really peer directed, like it's peer learning, but that's been huge, because then we can help dozens of companies kind of at a time, and it feels very scalable. I'd say the other thing as well is to not underestimate the value of just belief. When we talk to our portfolio companies about what stands out to them or stood out to them about Blackbird, they always talk about the fact that we just believed really early before everybody else. And I would encourage all the founders to just really look for that connection, because not everybody is going to get what you're doing. And for the investors out, just to remember that, just being there sometimes on the other side of the call, like on the side of the line, is just super important, and just taking the time to kind of pick up the phone on a Sunday if you can sense that there's something going through the founder's mind and they maybe don't have anyone else to talk to about it. Yeah, that's the other thing. So sort of almost like the do no harm principle.
Fantastic. Lauren, this one is for you. How hands-on are investors on the startup when they're advising a startup on scaling?
Sorry, Rosie, I think my connection cut out a little bit. Do you mind repeating that?
Yeah, the question was, how hands-on are investors when they're advising startups on that scale-up process?
Yeah, so this really depends on the investor. I mean, in our investor community, I would say you've got the typical passive investor, and then on the other end of the spectrum, a really active investor. So the active ones are the ones that have more time and, you know, typically perhaps, you know, they sit on boards, they don't have a sort of pressing 9 to 5, and they have time to help our founders. So in this case, they can join the boards as investor directors. They can be mentors, they can be advisors, they can just generally be support systems and networks. And the more passive investors we have, I mean, by no means they are also supporting our founders as well, but they tend to be a little bit more time poor, so the funds work quite well for them. And we often tell investors when they invest with us, like, you can be as active as you want. You can run your own due diligence process. You can get to know the founder. You can go visit the startup's premises. You know, we really encourage that, because to make this due diligence process as thorough as possible. And then when it comes to, I guess, being on that journey with the founder, because it's a long-term one, right? Like it's years and years of holding hands, and it's a really beautiful relationship or friendship. So, you know, investors can be involved as much as they want. And usually if they have a particular area of expertise, then you'll find, you know, particular investors will go towards certain startups that they feel like they can really help with their industry knowledge. And that's always a really amazing thing to see. Then, like I mentioned before, they might take more of a step up and actually like join the board and have a strategic, I guess, you know, method or input, I should say, as part of that startup journey.
Amazing. Oh gosh, I'm not on mute again. So thanks for that. That was really helpful. And so the next question is, what role do investors play in talent development for and with startups? So obviously from a recruitment background, I'm really interested in this, because I know, you know, some have a talent function, some don't. So yeah, well, what does that look like at the moment, I guess, for each of you?
Well, I think I sort of spoke a little bit to the Founder Academy and launching Operator Academies next year. So that's an example. And on the more recruitment side, we sort of have something we call internally like the talent lily pad. And so this is sort of an opt-in directory, I guess you could think it of people who want to work for Blackbird portfolio account companies. Think of it as a fancy Airtable, and they sort of indicate which you know, like what stage of company, what sectors, what locations, etc., that they're interested in. And then it's like a opt-in thing where you just click a bridge link and you can get direct intros. And that's really awesome for founders, because often then they're really just getting started. They don't have an employer brand. They're very time poor, etc. They may not be able to afford recruitment fees. They can just kind of browse through candidates and get connected there. And we've seen, you know, people hire within 7 days of us investing, which is, you know, awesome. And hire roles that are huge levers, like, you know, chief of staff or head of people or whatever it is. So that's something I'm really excited about. But I guess what I would maybe spruik here, if I may, is actually a cross collaboration or an industry wide program called StartMate and the fellowships that they're building. And there's actually quite a cool community of fellows in New Zealand, including one on this call. And this is really awesome, because it's like, you know, the whole community gets behind mentoring people who maybe want to accelerate their careers in startups or move into startups. And it creates this whole pool that we can all hire from as an ecosystem. And I think when you are a relatively small ecosystem, like it is important to create that, you know, ecosystem level infrastructure. So if you haven't heard of it, just definitely check it out, both if you're looking to hire, but also if you're maybe looking to progress a career in startups.
Yeah, I actually joined StartMate as a coach this spring.
Oh, awesome. Well done.
Yeah, and I just can't say how amazingly organized and well connected, and it's just, yeah, highly recommend for anyone that's looking to you know, get themselves out there.
Awesome. And I can kind of pick up on that. So at GD1, what we're really focused on is twofold. One, helping organizations scale internationally. So making sure that that global ambition is there, that we do help them kind of believe bigger and connect with those international markets. And so a lot of what we do in recruiting and hiring is actually placing in market talent. So talent in region, whether that's in the States, in Europe, et cetera, placing that talent within portfolio companies and helping connect with that talent. I think on the New Zealand side, the way that we've been supporting to date is really helping through interview processes and helping to vet candidates and ensuring that the skill sets that are there, whether that be in go-to-market and engineering, if it's deep tech, right, and hardware development, et cetera, really align with the job descriptions and the needs of the portfolio company. So kind of serving as a sounding board, and sometimes as a secondary or third interview option for portfolio companies who do want to have a different lens within the organization. We will be launching next year, given that we're like 3 months or 3 weeks away from the end of the year. We're going to be launching a jobs connection and a jobs portal and things like that for portfolio companies as well. But yeah, I really agree with Sam in that I think that this ecosystem in and of itself is really connected in a way, and can learn so much from each other, particularly on leveling up skills and how you actually implement best in class for SaaS, for product-led growth, for example, for like deep engineering or product problems. And the more we can have a kind of cross collaboration between funds and cross training between funds for talent, the better off the entire New Zealand technology ecosystem is going to be.
Okay, brilliant. We've got a couple of questions coming in, which is fantastic. So just a reminder, just pop those in the Q&A if you do have questions, and we will get to them soon. The next question on my list is, are there any overlaps or differences between management consulting and VC or early stage investing? And how does a startup figure out which one will add the most value? Who wants to take this one?
Can I maybe clarify the question? Is this engaging management consultants or?
Yeah, so when do you know that you should be maybe engaging with a VC? Maybe that's a better way to pose the question. At what stage in your journey what KPIs do you know that you need to hit before you start engaging with a VC?
I mean, I'll answer for maybe for Blackbird. So we you can't be too early to speak to us. So, we invested in Canva pre-product, pre-revenue. We've done that a bunch of times, like 65% of our investing is in companies that are pre-seed stage. So you can't be too early. We won't always say yes. It's, but that's sort of kind of a general rule of VC anyway. I'll probably only say yes 4 or 5 times a year. So but from our perspective, you can't be too early. But it is important, I think, if you're a founder going out there and trying to qualify which investors to speak to, that you understand what stage that they invest in, because there are a lot of funds that will only do sort of Series A to B and above, and so they have their criteria that they're looking for.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Sam said. Most VCs will, like they say, general rule of thumb, like they'll back founders from day one. Well, that's what ISAS Ventures does. So, before there's anything tangible to even bring to the table, it's an idea that's been presented, and we look at the founder and see, does this person have what it takes to execute on this? So you can never be too early. And just to add to everything that Sam mentioned, I think doing your research on each VC fund or firm and what areas or industries they tend to invest in is really useful as well, so that when you pitch to them, you have a particular angle, or do some research on other startups they've invested in, and how you could align with that. So yeah, it's never too early. Even if you're not at the stage where you're ready to raise capital, it's still good just to have a premature conversation. Like I often will talk to founders who aren't ready to, commence a proper capital raise, but they just want to know, like, how to navigate their way there, or just some general support. So yeah, my 2 cents is like, have a conversation with anyone at any time. Being too early doesn't, it's not going to hold you back.
Cool. That actually ties in really well to my next question, which is, what are the things that VCs look at that are kind of like the green flags, that are the ways that startups can help themselves when approaching VCs, even, like you said, from the stage when they're not actually ready?
Yeah, so there's 2 things that are really important to me, and I guess speaking on behalf of iSaaS Ventures too, that we look at when a company is pitching. So this ties in with our overall investment thesis. So there's the market size. So when you look at the total addressable market size, if a company is pitching an idea, you want some really hard facts and data and figures around how huge can this really get. Like, we want the startup to be worth billions, not multiple millions, but literally billions. So you want it to grow so big that it won't even touch the sides of the total addressable market. So market size is really important because that shows scalability, growth, global ambition, and essentially no limitations. And then the other important factor is the founder or the founding team. So the way I see it is that we're investing in an idea, but we're actually investing in the person who's going to go and then execute this idea and bring it to life. So we look for this magnetism that a founder brings. Like, I want to know what gets them out of bed every day to do this and embark on possibly the bravest journey of their life. Can they lead a 1,000 person team one day? Can we see them achieving these incredible milestones? So it really comes down to, this person who's driving this, amazing opportunity. And that's not comprehensive. There's just 2 things I've listed, but I'm sure, Heather and Sam could probably add to that. But those are really important, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would add a yes and to that. I think, Lauren, everything you said is
Not
totally
limited.
like table stakes, absolutely, very well articulated there. So from a more technical perspective, looking at pretty deep metrics, and this is both pre-product and post-product fit. They're going to be different success metrics that one looks at, whether it's a pre-MVP or post-MVP. But really understanding traction is pretty critical as well. So demonstrating, even if you're pre-product fit, what kind of traction you're getting in the market, where that traction is coming from, who your ICP is at that point in time, how you're gaining traction with them. And then if you're post-product market fit and you have revenue, really ensuring that your metrics are dialed in. So they may not be, you may still be a little bit early, right? They may not be massive. You may not be growing at, 30 to 50% MRR per month as an example. But if you can demonstrate early on that you have a firm grasp of your business and a firm grasp of what your metric look like from a cost of acquisition standpoint, what your overall like MRR and ARR growth rates are, your booking rates, things like that, it really helps create a sense of understanding and security that you're going to be able to manage a business as you grow. And I think that's also really, really critical, in addition to all of the like ambitious founders, globally ambitious, creating, the ability to manage teams and having a vision and sticking to that vision and having tenacity and grit, because it is hard. Like, building a startup is hard. It's really hard work. And so ensuring that personality is there as well is critical.
Okay, fantastic. My next question is, what the best way to find a VC? Where do you look and what are you looking for? And I'd also expand on that a little bit as well. Like, what is the best way to actually reach out to a VC?
Do you want to just repeat the start of it again? Sorry, Rosie, you cut out a little bit.
Oh, sorry. what is the best way to find a VC? Where do you look and what are you looking for? And what is the best way to reach out to them?
Well, my colleague put together this spreadsheet. It's the New Zealand investor Google sheet. So everybody is in there. And if you're not, you can just add yourself. And that's sort of split by stage and criteria. And maybe I'll go pull it up and like post it in the chat after this. Every fund and actually person will have a different ideal approach strategy. But for me, like just email me, sam@blackbird.vc. You don't need a warm intro.
Yeah, and for GD1, our pitch email is pitch@GD1VC. You can always like LinkedIn outreach works really well, depending on who you're targeting in the investor world. And then, yeah, I would say creating those connections and making the connections and trying to get a little bit of an in would be good too. But somebody has a question here, like compared to the US ecosystem, it's pretty easy to find who to pitch to within New Zealand, right? So I would highly just encourage go on LinkedIn and find the person and message them. That seems to be a really good way to do outreach here.
Yeah, I agree. At ISAS Ventures, you can just apply through the website, but most of our referrals come through, like LinkedIn or just, through the general network. Like a founder refers a founder, an investor refers a founder, and everyone in the team has an email inbox sort of, welcome and wide open. So yeah, and also that investor list is very handy. So thank you to the person who made that at Blackbird. Yeah.
I think if you're going to go the email route though, like you do need to spend some time finessing kind of what that looks like. It's going to be short, it's pithy.
Totally.
Please attach a deck. And it usually takes many iterations to get that right? So the more you share it and get feedback on it, the more, the better it will get. Maybe other people have a different view, but I personally hate the 1 to 3 pager. I have no problem receiving like a 15-page PDF because often I find something gets lost, or all the magic gets stripped out of a company or a founder or whatever when it's reduced to a 1-pager, and it's actually slower to read a 1-pager with very dense information than a 15-page slide deck. So that's maybe a follow on from the feel free to email anyone, but you have to keep tweaking what that message looks like.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think there's a few rules. Always be pitching, just like always be closing, always be pitching, always be tweaking your deck. Like I just was part of a raise at the last company I was at. We raised a pretty significant round and we tweak the deck like 3 times a day, depending on who we were talking to, what the investor's interest was. Granted, there's some core elements of the deck that stay the same and core elements of the story that stay the same. Your narrative is your narrative, but every investor, everybody who's looking at your company and your info in your DD room, they're going to want to see something different. And that's totally normal. It's really kind of frustrating and challenging when you're in it, like when you're living it day to day, but it's to be expected and something that you just kind of got to
It's just a core skill, right? Like it's a core skill. If you want to go down a venture path, you have to get really good at telling your story in pitch decks.
I wonder how many, what the average amount of pitches, to actually getting that support is, because I know there's some crazy stories about, Canva, for example, Mel pitched, hundreds of times before she got there. So do you have any, I don't know if there's any data on that, but I'm just asking this out of interest.
Well, it's probably changed. It's definitely changed nowadays to when I was, founder fundraising. But back then they used to say don't be 50 is your minimum number of meetings before you'll get a yes. And so often when I hear from founders that it's they're struggling fundraising, it's just that they haven't actually got the denominator right. Like they just have to have more coffees, speak to more people.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. I've just got someone has written, we need to, please repeat the email addresses that you mentioned. So maybe if you want to just chuck them down in the chat, that would be helpful. Or we can send them out after this, no worries. I'm just conscious of time. I thought what we could do is open up, because there's a few questions in the chat here, and try and get through a few of these. Jay's got a question for Lauren. So she's got here, Lauren said that the investors are looking for a return within 5 years of investing. What's the success rate with this approach? It sounds too early to have a return in 5 years. What percentage of startups have any return within this time frame?
Okay, I'll just clarify. I think I said with the funds, they're looking to return sort of like 5-10 years and beyond. So not within 5 years. Let me just clarify that. 5 years is considered very short. There have been companies that have exited or had a liquidity event within 5 years, but that's uncommon. Like I would say minimum 10 years before an investor sees a return, give or take. But you know, sometimes the best ones are just you know, take a very long time because they're growing and they're scaling, and therefore by the time you know you've held on to your shareholding in that company, and the uplift or the multiple is so high because you stuck around for sort of 10 plus years. Yeah, but I'd say like minimum 5 years. Like it's uncommon to see or rare to see something back within 4 to 5 years. What was the second part to that question? Sorry.
I think it's in the dismissed now or answered, maybe. What percentage of startups have any return within that time frame? I think you answered that.
Yeah. Cool.
I think maybe just I think Lauren, you sort of touched on an important point, which is there could be a liquidity event inside of 5 years, and particularly for pre-seed investors where you may be doing a couple of 100K or not even that much in a pre-seed round. It's not that uncommon these days to see angel investors or pre-seed investors selling down all or some of their stake inside of 5 years to the Series B investor, or even a secondaries fund. And so that is definitely a release valve for early stage investors. They're not having to push companies, not that they ever had to push companies, but like it is not necessary for companies to themselves get sold or list or whatever on a particular time frame to deliver returns to investors, which is very positive development.
100%.
So we have a question here from Georgie. When you say you invest in the person/founding team, can you compare startups with a solo founder or more than one founder? Do you have a preference or unique insight? So I guess, do you prefer solo founder or multiple founders? And what's the difference between those two, if there is? This is for anyone.
I'll quickly say, I think some people have the opinion of this solo founder risk. I'm not saying that I or we as a firm necessarily believe in that. We've invested in a lot of individual founders and they've gone on to do exceptionally. There's downsides and upsides to having an individual and a team. The Sharesies founding team have 7 founders, and we've also invested in some exceptional individuals. So it really depends on the actual business itself and what they're trying to achieve. Does it take 2 or 3 people, or does this one person have it all and has the knowledge, the experience, and the drive and the tenacity to make that business come to life? So yeah, honestly, really depends. We don't have a strong preference. I'd say in a portfolio, typically there are more than one founder, so there is a team. Or later on, what will happen is we'll invest in an individual, then they typically bring on a co-founder or co-founders later, maybe after their first raise. And then Sam or Heather, you can add to that.
Yeah, I would say I mean, it's not a deal breaker at all. It's not like we would, say, hey, we won't invest in you unless you find a co-founder, which I know like some people do feel that strongly about it. It is bloody hard building a startup by yourself. I will say that is super, super tough. And it's not an irrelevant consideration depending on the particular idea or business and founder to consider whether they are adequately supported. I think for our solo founders, actually we or the investor ends up being kind of a de facto co-founder. Like you're not operating in the business, but you do have to be willing to take on not the burden, but like the responsibility of riding the emotional highs and lows with them to a greater degree than you might if you were backing a team who were who already had co-founders. I guess if I had to stack rank my preference, it would be top preference would be a founding team who have worked together or know each other really well and have kind of battle tested their relationship before. My second preference would be a solo founder who's adequately kind of up to the task of what that particular company requires. And my last would be a gunshot co-founding relationship, which a lot of people like think, oh, I've got to have a co-founder. And so they go out there and they just try and find someone like they were hiring for a job, but it's really different to hiring for a job. And they sort of haven't tested the relationship to a significant degree. And then that, and kind of working through how to make that relationship work while you're trying to build the plane as it's taking off can be a massive recipe for disaster. So I would almost rather, if you don't think you have that person, get cracking as best you can by yourself, because I think that's better than being distracted with business divorce on the side.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, from my perspective and, GD1's standpoint, the co-founder founder relationship is so critical, right? So whether you're a solo founder or not, that's, each can be equally beneficial. Each can have its risk, as already been talked about. But if there is multiple co-founders that are coming to the table to grow this organization, it is a deep, deep relationship. It is not just a business relationship. It's not just a working relationship. There is emotional support that comes along with that as well. And so ensuring that the dynamics are balanced and ensuring that you have that actually figured out on the front end, because you will get questions about that, is pretty critical. And if you can do some kind of personality, like testing, team dynamic testings, look at StrengthsFinder and find something like that shows your compatibility and where your strengths complement each other, and use that as part of your due diligence or your pitch, that can be a really helpful way to give a VC assurance that this relationship is, as Sam said, battle tested, or you will be able to get through those really tough times that come with growing a startup.
I actually I had dinner with some founders this week who have worked together previously, but they've only just come together as co-founders, and they told me they wrote each other vows, which I thought was so awesome. And I was like, tell me about these vows and the process that went into it. And it was so thoughtful. They talked about what their dreams were for the company, why that problem, what was the time frame that they could see themselves committing for, all that sort of stuff. And I was like, yeah, of course you should do that. Like, why don't more people do that? So write vows.
As you can see, there's a theme here: marriage, vows, divorce. It's not just a business relationship.
Love it. Joanne Stanya's got a good question here. Have you found any differences in female founders to your stereotypical male founder? And do you look for the same traits that others typically identify, or have you found more diversity in this area by focusing on females? It might be one for you, Lauren, with your what you're working on at the moment. Sure,
I can kick this off. So I guess I feel very lucky in my job or my role that I spend 70% of my time focusing on looking after the female founder community. So that's looking after the founders that we've already invested in, hearing pitches from other women, because, you know, that it gets referred to me naturally because I'm kind of that person in the team. But, you know, as on a broader sense, as a firm, we like to treat and assess every company with equality. You know, there is this unconscious bias that does exist. You know, it's backed by stats. It happens all the time overseas. It happens here when, you know, investors unfortunately don't realize it, but they are, you know, asking questions or assessing women-led businesses in a different way that therefore puts them in a disadvantaged position compared to when a man is pitching to them. So I'm conscious of this, and so I, you know, try and combat that. And instead, I just, if I'm hearing a pitch from a man or a woman, you know, I'll ask the same questions in the same tone, you know, with equality. And I also have, you know, a level of empathy towards women, knowing that they, you know, speaking from experience from some of the founders in our portfolio, that they have it a lot harder. So they have to dodge a lot more bullets. I mean, pitching is already quite difficult and challenging, and requires, you know, a lot of confidence and bravery. And they, on top of that, have to sort of, dodge bullets. And sometimes, in their words, it feels like they're having like daggers thrown at them, and they've tried to avoid these like difficult questions. So I make an effort to just ask kind of standard questions as if I was talking to anyone, and try and treat them, you know, no different, but in a good way, because I'm conscious that, you know, the next pitch they do might be a lot more difficult, and sadly that's because of their gender. So
yeah, I mean, I'm fully on board with that. I mean, creating kind of equality in assessment, due diligence, and just that, you know, upfront kind of pitch or representation is absolutely critical. I've heard some pretty intense horror stories about women asking if they're going to have a baby soon, if they are, what their husband thinks of them starting a startup. And like, those are questions that we should all very much avoid. Like, as somebody who is 33 weeks pregnant and working in tech for a very long time, I think it's really important to be conscious when going into meetings, not just with founders, but with anybody in the tech ecosystem, because it is such a pervasive issue, right, within tech as a whole. That said, I personally, this is Heather speaking, not necessarily GD1. I'm sure they would agree with me, but I'm a firm believer that representation around the executive table and representation at the board level and representation throughout a company creates a stronger growth trajectory. It's been proven in data, but without that representation, not just female, male, but ethnicity, etc., you don't get the diversity of thought that's needed to really create global scale. You don't get the diversity of thought needed to really serve a user in the way that they should be served. So I again would just encourage us as an ecosystem to think through that lens of representation and equality, as well as we're, you know, evaluating companies and growing our businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome call out, Heather. And I would say it's gotten to a point, at least for us, and we can't be the only ones, where we'll see pitch decks or companies will come in and the team side will go up. And we'll actually talk in the post-pitch session about how that was like the widest, malest like team slide that we've ever seen. And that's a problem. And how do we think that, do the founders think this is a problem? How are they going to address this? Like, this is, you know, it falls under the ESG banner, but it's, you know, it's a big thing for us, and we turn the mirror on ourselves, and our team is 50% women, and we've had to do work to get there. We weren't born that way as a company. So 100% echo what Heather has said there. I would say as well, like, I would sort of almost wish for things further up the chain as well, like before it comes to like founding teams or what have you. I do get the sense that women struggle to find technical co-founders to a greater degree than their male counterparts. And the reason is not necessarily because they're women. It's like, if you're a man, you probably know more men, or more people with a technical background, just because of the overrepresentation of men relative to women in universities, in engineering courses, or what have you. And so it's easier for you to go to your peer network and say, hey, I've got this idea, and what do you think? And brainstorm and tinker, and then suddenly you've got an MVP or a prototype, and so you've got progress or whatever. And the woman in the same position with the same great idea just may not have at her fingertips the network to enable her to make that same unit of progress that unlocks kind of something else. And I often just feel like, and it's just totally unfair, right? Because the ideas are distributed equally, everywhere. And I just wish there was some way of kind of, pulling together, not just women, but other people from less diverse backgrounds, and just giving them more opportunities for luck or serendipity to strike with the product people who are required to bring it together. And then obviously we live in an era as well where it's possible to low code and no code things on the software side that's still less available on the physical tech side or bio, whatever, although bio is generally more diverse than software or mech eng areas. So I don't know if there are many men on this call, but think of your potential women co-founders out there. And, I think the archetypal example in our portfolio, at least, is Melanie from Canva. She is 100% a product visionary, and that company is like just all male bottled in, not bottled, but you know what I mean, captured in a product. She could not have built that product herself, but those people who built the product could not have built Canva because she is a product visionary. And it was just such serendipity in a way. I mean, it was actually heaps of hustle, but also luck that, that Mel and those engineers kind of came together to build that company. And I just want that kind of serendipity for more awesome women founders.
Fantastic. I've got a really good question that's just come in from a fellow woman working in venture capital. Can you talk about the challenges you've had to overcome working in VC when it comes to talking to founders, and on the other side, talking to fellow investors? Any insight from anyone on this one?
I'm happy to go. I do find sometimes when I speak to male founders, they assume I'm less technical than I actually am. But sometimes that can be useful, because if someone can't explain something well simply, then that's just a key pitching skill. I do be really honest, like I do get there are definitely some investors who think I'm too young or too female or too whatever, but I just don't really care what other people think. So I think there are so many more people who are cheering you on, and if you love the work, then that's what really matters.
Yeah, I had faced similar, I wouldn't say they were like too big of a challenge, but when I first started out, I obviously I think being new was probably the biggest challenge. So when I was going to sit down with investors and pitch funds, I was very lucky. Most of them were lovely and took me seriously, but I'd sort of hear later on through a colleague that sort of asked like, oh, she seems really young, like this is her first job. And it's true, Icehouse Ventures is my first job. It's my first and only job. One of them said, oh, will her music distract her to reach the target of this fund? Like I literally DJ on the weekends. I don't know why that's relevant, but yeah, I mean, it didn't knock me down or anything. And like Sam, I just don't really care. As long as I, can prove what my mission and what I'll set out to do, then that's all that matters to me. Yeah, and I think, being young, maybe being female, amongst my sort of colleagues who at the time, weren't female, I guess that was a bit of a maybe a shock for some investors, but yeah, at this stage, I think I'm in a really good place, and I feel very fortunate with the people that I interact with, both investors and founders.
Speak to this both from sitting on the other side of the table as a female operator within high growth companies, and then from the VC side. So as an operator, I've definitely, faced the "you're not technical enough" issue as well. I think that that's a pretty common one, unfortunately. Even if there's a deep technical background there, or if there has been a pretty robust market education, if you will, around the subject that you're engaging in. And that honestly has been really challenging to overcome. I would agree it's a bit of a benefit when being pitched to, because you can kind of be like, okay, well, explain it to me then, right? And they have to do that. But as on the other side, as an operator, when going in and working with a VC, or reporting to a board who is also, one of your investors, there's some challenge there that definitely needs to be overcome. On the VC side, I honestly have been pretty fortunate to not have a lot of bias. I think that may be because I have the kind of added background of working in Silicon Valley, and that kind of equates out a little bit of the potential challenge that comes with being a female. And it is what it is, whether that's a pro or a con, it's just like, it is what it is. So yeah, it's definitely been more challenging on the operating side for me than the actual, VC side of the house. And then the majority of my interactions with our LPs and our investors have actually been around ESG. I have a pretty deep background and expertise. I actually studied sustainability and ESG way back when in university. So I do a lot of our work around ESG. And that I've actually had nothing but positive experiences with. And so that's been really, really encouraging to be able to interact with the investment community, and particularly our LPs, and have such encouraging conversations around ESG and representation and diversity, and how GD1 is committing to that, and what programs we're putting in place to really back that in a way that's meaningful.
Wow, great insights. Thank you. We've probably got time for maybe one or two more questions. There's one here from an anonymous attendee. It's kind of flipping it a bit. I think there might be a few people on this call that would love to get a job at a VC. So do either of you have any advice on that? Yeah.
I think, I don't know, maybe we all have different perspectives, but from my perspective, I think it's really, really important to work in a company that is a high growth tech company, just so you can have that empathy. Like we've said this multiple times on this call, but starting a company, growing a company, it takes tenacity, it takes grit. It's a challenging thing to do. And being able to empathize with your founders and your executive operating teams, and even those within the organization that are operating at all levels in a way that's authentic and really catalyzes conscious growth with them, I think is invaluable, like really invaluable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Heather. When I often think about why my boss decided to hire me, I don't even think he probably looked at my resume, but the fact that I had started my own company and I'd gone through the hurdles and the great times, but understood what it kind of took, and I had some brief experience working at a startup. So for him it was experience, and just to for people on the call, you don't need finance experience or background. I have a marketing and management degree. Even at school, I sort of stayed away from like math or anything kind of technical as soon as it wasn't compulsory, just because it wasn't really my thing. So I never thought I'd end up working in the sort of broad finance space. Like that was just never that was never in my career horizon. So I remember thinking, like, there's no way I can work in a venture capital firm. Like, I don't look at spreadsheets and I'm not good with numbers. But what I was passionate about, and am still passionate about, startups. Went through the journey myself, worked for a friend who had a late stage startup, and those were things that my boss really valued and values in our other employees as well. And I'll just add to that as well, if you have none of those things, you don't need to have had your own business or had worked in one. But I think if you're up to date with the startup trends, like what's happening in the market right now, here and overseas, if there's one startup that you are particularly in love with and you want to work for them one day, then telling these things and showing this to a VC or in your interview is really important, that you can identify these industry trends and why a VC firm should pursue that. Then to them it shows, okay, well, this person's been doing their research, they're passionate, and they could be a great asset to the team.
I won't sort of add anything extra. I actually wrote a blog post about what I think the next sort of what I would do if I was starting out today, and I just think it's all about creating a honeypot for talent, and that there's no particular background that you require anymore to do VC, because you've just seen people from all sorts of backgrounds, like teenagers that start a podcast are now VC fund managers. It's just attract founders, good companies, and like build some sort of a track record, even if it's not with cash, and it's possible to get into VC. I think like once you cross that hurdle, though, you should make a decision about which VC you choose and why, because I got kind of lucky in that I knew the Blackbird founders as people before I went to work for them, and I didn't realize until after I was a VC how much your personal reputation as a VC gets blended with the reputation of your firm, and essentially the reputation of your firm is like the average of how you have treated people historically. It is totally a relationship business, and so take your time to really like get comfortable around the values and motivations of the people running the firms that you are thinking of going to join. I would say the other thing that, again, I didn't know before I became an actual VC is like pretty much all of your wealth will be put into that fund. So you have to believe with every cent in your bank account, because you personally have to invest pretty much everything you have in that fund, which is maybe fine if you're an early employee of Facebook to put whatever 2% of your wealth into a fund. But if you haven't made a lot of money before joining VC, and I certainly am in that category, your whole life is leveraged to the fund. And I'm happy for that to be so, but a lot of people, actually women as well, or people who don't, know venture capitalists or come from this background, like are surprised when they get promoted to partner and are asked to cough up $500,000 or $1 million as a GP commit. And that doesn't actually come from your fellow partners who are also being asked to cough up that. It comes from institutional investors who want to see alignment between you and their money. That's obviously down the line. That's only like when you're partner level and whatnot. But it's just something to think about, because it's very different to sort of lots of other jobs where you can kind of move between different companies, and it doesn't affect your personal track record or reputation too much.
Thanks, Sam. That's really insightful. Can you please put the link to the blog in the chat as well? Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've got lots of great questions that we're not going to get through. So just a quick question for our panelists. If people do have specific questions that we don't get to, what's the best way for them to ask? Is that to connect on LinkedIn or send you an email? What would you prefer with some of our amazing unanswered questions?
I'm better on Twitter DMs. So it's @OlaSammy
For me, LinkedIn or email, which I put in the chat, or, you know, Sinead or Rose, you can distribute that. That's fine. Either's fine.
Yeah, LinkedIn or Twitter for me. I'm atrocious on email. It'll take me a little bit of time to get back to you. Even superhuman isn't helping. So definitely like Twitter DM, I'm at Gaddoniex, just my last name, or LinkedIn.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to ask one last question, and it's kind of a mix of a few people's questions, just taking it back to when you are pitching. What is one of the biggest red flags that you see in pitches? Like, what should people not be doing? And what is something that definitely has to be covered off within that pitch?
I'll go for the last bit of the question first. I think, you know, there's lots of stuff on the internet about what has to go into pitches, but so all of that. But I think maybe the under considered thing is like the order that you put things in. And I always think about like, you want to make your story as easy to transmit as possible or as viral as possible. You want to be able to have a half an hour conversation with the VC and for them to be able to go straight back to their partnership and get them excited if they're excited. And that usually means you have to like strip down to like 2-3 really key things and front load those things. So if you don't have much traction and you haven't built a product yet, but wow, you have assembled the team that is going to, you know, execute on this and has, you know, deep expertise in all this area, like don't leave it till your team slide on, you know, slide 14, like front load that. So think about what are your 3 strengths at that particular point in time for the company, and front load it is what I would say.
The power of a narrative. So really focus on your narrative. What is the market opportunity? How are you going to tackle that? Why is your organization the organization to really capture the TAM? And that can take a long time to really refine and build out. And there's a lot that goes into those 3 or 4 slides in the upfront. But it's so critical to get that right and ensure that you believe it with every single fiber of your being as you're pitching. So yeah, first piece of advice, focus on the narrative, ensure you're getting it right. Secondarily, when looking at TAM, make sure that you don't think too small, right? There's a big, bad global world out there. There's a lot of market opportunity for challenges that need to be solved. I think that just in full transparency, some of the pitches and the decks that I've seen here, there's a little bit narrow focused and narrow thinking. Think bigger, believe bigger, dream bigger. Like it's a big market. There's a big world. There's a lot of people you can sell things to. So think bigger when developing your TAM. And then if you're post MVP and you have revenue, start to see some of those really clear like growth trajectories and compelling stories around growth that you've seen, customer quotes, things like that. They go a long way when just flipping through a deck.
Yeah, I just one last thing to add. Obviously, all those things are so important that have been mentioned. I also think it's really useful to talk about yourself and your background and why you came to like where you are today, right now, pitching to this particular VC. You know, it's like I've mentioned, and I'll emphasize again, you know, we're investing in this person who's going to take essentially nothing and make it into something. And so, you know, the why, like the original motive is really important to include in that pitch. And then I'll also mention, like, you know, pitches are great and we want them to be comprehensive and detailed and you know, have a lot of, you know, data and facts and everything in there, but keep it succinct as well, because if you want to circulate that deck around the team, you know, it can't be sort of too long and be too, I guess, text heavy. Yeah, that's all I'll add to that.
Okay, fantastic. Do we have time for one more question, or do our panelists need to head off? I know there's some time constraints here.
I'm good for one more.
Okay, perfect. Jay's got a question. How do you assess the solo non-technical founders of tech startups? This is a bit of a specific one.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Rosie?
Sorry, must be coming up. How do you assess the solo non-technical founders of a tech startup? This question is from Jay.
I'm happy to jump in if that's helpful.
Go for it, Sam. You can follow
Yeah.
up.
We're always just looking for the product vision. We don't need to see the product necessarily, but the product vision. And I think, again, Mel's instructive here, right? Because we invested pre-product, pre-revenue. But if you look at her deck, and it's, you know, on the, it's all over the internet, and it's in a blog post that I can link to as well. Like, it's so compelling, it's so vivid, and in such rich detail, you don't even realize that there's no product yet, because you can see it in your mind. And you know, particularly with software startups, like, you know, it's not really a question that you can build it now. The technical challenge to building most software products is pretty low these days. So it's more about, like, are we amazed by the product roadmap and the product vision that's spelt out, and do we believe that this person can attract the team that can build the product?
Yeah, I would definitely echo that, and just add on the team side, like, it's one thing to have a super compelling vision and make sure that that's there, absolutely, but the more you can come to the table with how you've thought through, like, how you would build, even if you're not a technical co-founder, but hey, you know, I know that I can get resources from here to do this, or I think that I can go in and build this product with XYZ in XYZ timeframe. Just even having that information in your back pocket as you're pitching shows confidence and shows that you've already thought through how to bring that roadmap to life in a meaningful way.
Cool. I think we're getting a bit close to time, so we'll leave it there. But I mean, there's so many good questions. I'm sad that we can't answer them all. So I'm sure you'll all get a few DMs after this. Cool. Well, thank you all so much. We really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm sure there'll be a few, you know, females and males both walking away from this call feeling really inspired.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. That was absolutely fantastic.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
so much.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah,
Oh,
such a
awesome.
pleasure, and I hope you found it all very useful.
Perfect. Any last words of wisdom from anyone?
Happy New Zealand Thanksgiving. I'm going to go eat a lot of turkey. So
Oh yeah, go and enjoy.
hope you all have a wonderful
Exactly.
day, and think about what you're grateful for today.
Fantastic.
So feel free to reach out anytime, and I hope you found today useful. Thank you, Sinead and Rosie.
I was going to say, yeah, I love the gratitude, and you know, I'm actually grateful for this, right? Because, you know, 5-6 years ago, when I was, you know, a founder getting started in this ecosystem, I would often be the only woman in the room. Then I was the only woman VC in the room, and now look at where we are. And so let's just keep supporting each other, and well, let's do this.
Woo.
3 more.
Okay.
Again.
Love it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.